finish up with some of these benefits real quickly and get into some of the example codes so we can try to get some questions out of the way. So a lot of people might look at this and go, hey, I don't understand the benefit of Camel. It looks like there's a lot of code required there. Well, fact is, it significantly reduces the amount of code required to achieve these complex integrations. As I mentioned earlier on, it comes with a lot of infrastructure and instrumentation that you need in these integration strategies, like retry policies and transaction management. We were just talking about the concept of aggregation. You might have a receiver that needs to receive data from 20 different sources before your workflow can actually begin. So you need to aggregate that data, and you know when you've received all 20 pieces of information to come in at a given time, and then kick off your actual processing of the data. Well, if you try to develop that by hand from scratch with all the reliability in there, so you don't lose any messages that you've received, having to kick off at the right time, so it'd be a lot of work. But with Camel already has these components in there. And all I have to do is implement your aggregation strategy. Aggregation strategy is when you tell Camel when it's the right time to go ahead and take all these messages that can be aggregated this way and kick off the workflow. So it involves built-in tools, server transact logging, remote management. I think remote, depending on the size of your organization or your service level agreements that you have with your customers, being able to monitor your systems is a real big deal. And you could spend lots of money and very sophisticated monitoring technology, but still not really have a good sense of what your systems are doing. Camel, there's a lot of products that or not products, but a lot of other projects that have been developed alongside Camel that allow you to watch the Camel route in real time, live, and to be able to see the messaging go through there, to be able to debug it as it's doing. So there's a lot of good tooling around that. Red Hat did a study of 6 different organizations from these various industries here, from telecommunications, IT, logistics, and document management. But what they found from those customers is that about they had 51.5% more integrations per year after they're using Fuse in this case with Camel. Camel really makes it easy for them to do that. They required 40% less full-time employees, 62% less downtime in production. So just yeah, maybe it's a bad idea to recommend it'd be a hero. And it is a 34% less costly than other middleware solutions. So proprietary, if you work with proprietary middleware, proprietary integration solutions, you find that most of these vendors, not only the upfront costs are a problem, but the level of support or the really having the product that you needed at the time you need it is very unlikely. It's a real hassle, and that's why things like open source and community projects started and emerged 15, 20 years ago, and had some success. And this is definitely one of the big success stories in that space. So Camel and ESB. Anybody in the middle of a ESB-based project right now? You guys pick a ESB vendor? Mule. Okay. Mule's very, yeah, and Camille uses the patterns. The craft. Service mix. Yeah, that's what and that Apache service mix was their original ESB attempt by the Apache organization. And born of that was the craft server. And when this craft broke out, then Camel just kind of went across with it. Still considered premium platform for doing this. But really, Camel's not an ESB in the ESB sense. So we don't really look to Camel to be your ESB, but JBoss Fuse, though, is more considered an ESB because of the tooling. In order for really something for you to have an ESB, you need to have a way of easily setting up configure those endpoints, those configure integrations that you want, and deploying. And Camel's not really about it. Camel's about providing that, but it's not really about doing that. So those are the extra tools that come around. So the whole tool suite. Just throw that out there. Because I have in the past had people come up and say, yeah, you know, how's Camel's an ESB and all this stuff. So it's not really an ESB. You got to have this, this, and this, and the tooling to be able to connect one endpoint to another. You need to have server for serving it, you need to have monitoring, all this stuff. That really constitutes an ESB. Also, when you really think practically about Camel, when you have power, when you get your ox, your buffalo, your horse, your donkey, your mule, said yeah, using mule ESB, right? Frankly, it's going to get more power out of that camel. It's not going to work as long as a horse, but that's the Department of Agriculture, they know what they're talking about.
You got a chuckle.
Hey, that's a for chuckle. Okay, just I talked about deploying Camel application or having a Camel platform to work off of. We talked extensively about JBoss Fuse. That's its space. And Fuse is really Apache Carafe. It's an OSGI container. And there it's listed right there. Blueprint. Blueprint is an OSGI declarative language, more XML. And very similar, it's based off of Spring, like Spring Beans, so the same thing. So your very common way of using Camel on Fuse or Camel on Carafe is to create your routes using the XML domain-specific language and deploy them as blueprints. But you can bootstrap Camel standalone, start it up from the command line. You can do it Spring Boot or even put Camel into a Spring WAR file, and you can use both the XML DSL or the Java DSL to define your Camel routes. If you're more of a Java enterprise-centric shop and you have your context and dependency framework or EJB, you can bootstrap Camel with CDI. And I want to tie together, just show you guys some of the code, really what this means in all juice. Well, what is the thing here? We've got these inversion of control containers, right? And what's the big important piece of these inversion control containers? That we are getting components that are being the life cycle of these components are being created and managed by the container. I have singleton components, or I can have prototype components. In CDI, I can have ones that are scoped to different webs life cycles. But I have these components. These components have these capabilities, business logic services. and I want those wired together to other components. And Camel comes with integration layer for all those, so that if I am in spring and I've got all these spring beans, and I want my Camel to talk to those spring beans, it will, because it has a bootstrap mechanism that bootstraps into the spring context. Same with the CDI, juice, and all that. So it really seamlessly integrates into very common IOC type patterns. Anybody, I'm curious, anybody working on any projects that aren't IOC based? It's not Spring, it's not mobile guy back there. When do you mobile guys get with it?
There are a couple where we have to integrate it.
Okay, so just any questions, anything you want us to clear up? I'm hoping that I can help tie this together a little better with just showing you guys some source code. It's not too complex.
So comparing it to Mule, what is it lacking, or what is the advantage?
You know, that's a good question. And the one thing about Mule, of course, is the whole tool set, right? And a server platform. So, and that's what closes the loop for being an ESP. So but otherwise it's the same. It does the same stuff. It provides enterprise integration patterns, that has logic, has routing, connects all these endpoints and everything. But if I wanted to get the same capabilities that you have in Mule, then I would go and get JBoss Developer Studio with the Fuse plugin. I can now graphically design my routes. Those would tie into either JBoss EAP or JBoss Fuse server, and they would automatically deploy, and I can debug and do all those things. And then Mule has great production monitoring tooling as well. And same thing, Fuse has a production monitoring. It's called Fabricate, and it incorporates stuff from an original community project called Hot.io. Red Hat acquired Hot.io earlier this year. So it's still, even though they acquire these open source projects, they're really acquiring the idea, they're acquiring the developers, they're acquiring the concept, but it's still an open product. There's still a community version for the community version. It's just that they are there to provide that support and to make sure it's a viable choice. It is a great choice. So I would put the Fuse, I put JBoss or Red Hat's offering as an ESP up against Mule ESP.
So when I haven't used the tools, but it basically generates an XML file, and you could technically just add in XML instead of using the tools to make it do things.
Yeah,
it would be similar to that. Just adding would be.
Oh yeah, it's still a Camel. It can be broken down very simply. And it's not dependent on the tools. You can just throw any Camel-based XML at it, or put Camel XML into a string file and throw it at it, programmatically do it. It's not dependent on this tool set. Sometimes the tool sets are good, sometimes they're bad, sometimes they interfere with test automation, and sometimes they work very well. Okay. Yes.
For cloud environments, like when you're trying to kick off multiple boxes of Amazon Web Services, or when you have multi-cloud environments, you could theoretically use Camel as sort of your standard platform. And then are there adapters that work on either of those worlds?
Well, that's a good question. Here we go. There's a lot of AWS components that already exist. Yeah, so these will tie in and automatically, those will be configured automatically inside the AWS and EC2 domains. So that's a great question. Okay, so I'm going to sit down and so I'm going to start with this ETL. So we had a question about ETL. And so these examples actually come from the Camel download. Now, Camel, of course, is managed by Maven. And so if you want to include Camel in the project, you've got Maven or any other coordinate-based system, hopefully not using Buildar. I get one chuckle. Ivy would work, but yeah, so you can include Camel really easily as a Maven dependency. And all these components, the components are also broken down into their own individual artifacts. And if you include that component in your Maven build, then that component becomes available. It uses, for most systems, it uses the Java service locator pattern. If it's OSGI, it uses an OSGI-based pattern, which doesn't support the Java service locator. So, does that need to be large?
Boris, can you read that?
Sure.
Of course it
I don't.
can. He's got strong eyes. Yeah, okay, let me pump the font up just a tad. See, these glasses are not my close-in glasses. So this is, we have the Spring Beans configuration files. And in here is, we have a namespace. Sorry. Oh, here we go. So, the Camel namespace, so basically we get our nice and close-in data, XML stuff. We have one or more Camel context defined. There's sort of scoping around that, but it gives you the opportunity to have contexts that are de-scoped from each other, so they can hide stuff that's generated inside them. But they can also talk to each other, bridge across, and they still work within your Spring domain. All these Spring Beans, they might be defined here as an XML, or they could be annotated as services or components. They're all going to be available to our Camel context. But what we don't see here is we don't see any routes. We don't see any Camel routes. What it's telling me here is that my routes are being defined using Java DSL somewhere in one of those packages. So if I go and dig up here, and I see that there's a class called ETL routes. And now look at an example of Java defined. So we've got our fluent language here, right? We're going to convert it to something, and then we're going to send it to actually a JPA ending. So JPA simply just isn't really going to be true for very long. So I would normally send this, like create this document, I'm going to send it to a service endpoint and say, hey, it's persisted or whatever. Here is, this is interesting, it's reading from this entity, this JPA entity. And we see here some of the parameters. So this is, again, a URI. We've got our component. We've got some subcomponent of that. And you see a question mark. Everything after the question mark is a list of parameters, very similar to a HCP URI list. Oops. And that's sideways through it. This is telling me this JPA endpoint has the ability to pull our entity table. So it'll pull it, and it's going to look for something new. There's going to be some rule around what new means when it's in a table. Again, probably not one of the best patterns. I would recommend the JMS queue or stuff like that. But whatever floats your boat. Now it's actually relatively rare that you even need to create a converter, a type converter. A lot of times where your data is coming in, it's going to be coming in JSON or XML. You just use JAX-B to transform it. But in this case, this is a great example of our data that is coming in via XML. We are using JAX-B. I want to show you how. Okay, so let's take a look at this test data real quick. All right, so we've got some XML. That's the test data that's going in. When we look back at our route, we see that it's just a file that's being dropped. That's the XML file. It's being converted to a person document. Take a look at our person document. And what do we have here? We have some JAX-B annotations. So we really don't have to go through a lot of effort to tell Camel, hey, use JAX-B and load up this entity domain, do all this stuff. We just say, hey, we're going to convert it. I want you to load it and convert it into this type. It's going to see I've got JAX-B annotations. I've got an XML document. Hey, I'm going to automatically create this poser for you. Real simple. After here. Okay, and then of course, now it's, when we load it, Camel's creating an instance of a person document right here. But we're not storing a person document. We're storing a customer entity. We need to transform it from a person document to a customer entity. And how do we do that? We do that by creating a custom transformer. So this custom transformer here, this custom transformer does a transformation for us, real simple, get here, set there. And it's very simple for us to add. So we're creating a Camel component and adding it to the system by following the service loader pattern. Everybody familiar with that? Where you've got an interface or an abstract definition that you can put into the meta-inf services folder. Go here. So Camel looks for this type converter, the org.apache.camel.type converter. So if you have anything defined in there, you're fully qualified to if you have everything in there, Camel's going to load that up. And anytime it needs to transform, it looks at the payload that it's carrying, and it looks at what you're trying to do, it will automatically find the right transform to do that. Or if you don't have it, it'll give you a big fat error, a whole lot of debugging output, and you scratch your head for a while and think, oh, okay, that's what I gotta do. Okay, so that was just a bad example. Any questions on that? Let's do one more and then open it up and close it up. I wanted to do this one on a REST endpoint. It's pretty interesting. This is actually a relatively new feature in Camel. So again, both of these examples don't include Camel routes that are created in the string beans context using the XML DSL. They're both Java-based. And I chose that because it seems like everybody here more preferred the Java-based side anyway. Another way to specify, as we see our Camel context, another way to specify where your Java DSL routes are is to create a bean here, and then pass that bean in as a route builder reference to your Camel context. And Camel is going to go to that bean. So what this route is doing is it's actually using a DSL to create a RESTful endpoint for us. We can throw in our configuration, which should recognize things, context path and port, and it's saying, hey, this is expect to have JSON, so use a JSON component to create poses for me when data comes in. Then down here, we find that we have a fluent language and we start describing the REST service. So we define our what the entity is, which is user. We can add metadata to it, to a REST endpoint. This REST service actually will respond to, it's slipping my mind. It's a RESTful, automated RESTful documentation. Swagger. Swagger has certain request commands that it can issue over the HTTP and respond back with documentation and the metadata description for REST service. You can throw that in here. It's pretty cool. So if you're familiar with JAX-RS, you can say that, hey, this endpoint accepts JSON type, and it produces JSON type, and then you start adding in some parameters that are part of the RESTful URI, and so on and so forth, right? So here, what this is saying is, if we get user, and it's a HTTP GET request, and this URI is the user / the ID of the user, okay? We're going to be looking up a user class, that's what's going to be going back, and that's going to be mapped back out to a JSON. But when this request comes in, let's call this bean, the user service bean, and we're going to pass in the ID that's being passed. So I just want to show you, this is how you tie your code to a Camel route. So just going back to our string configuration, we have this user service bean here that's being defined in the Spring context. And by this ID name, we can get Camel to go out and talk to it using one of the Camel components called bean. And so the bean says, it will pass. Now this could get very complex, the amount of information that can pass into a method. And you can not say anything about what you expect to accept, which means that you have no parameters on your method. Or you can have an object in there to accept the message body that's being transmitted through your route. Or you have a specific user type, because Camel knows how to translate the ID into a user, how to convert to translate the ID to a user. Or you can accept exchange, the Camel exchange. There's a lot of reading on that. I'm not going to go too much further. Okay, so the user service, take a look at this guy. And we are, what was it called? Get user? Oh, get user. Okay. So this is pretty much, right? Closure. It is get user ID, blah, 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 looks it up and returns it. Pretty simple way of binding a service bean to a route. Right here. Now, it's, again, there's a lot of rules around how Camel is going to call a method. If you have a class that has just one method in it, and it accepts a parameter value, accepts an argument, and returns a value, Camel will just call that one method. You don't have to tell it to call it, it'll call it. It'll pass the information into its argument. And if that method returns anything, in this case, user service returns user. User becomes now our message in our Camel route. Becomes that main message. And that would get passed on to the next thing in the chain. Where if we look at a route builder, and that back out, there really isn't anything left. So there's nothing left after call user service. So that data gets, that user becomes the response back to the request.
Just real quick, why do you have outside monitors and you're automatically able to use it?
So with the REST API, that's not necessary. It will, even without the REST API, you don't necessarily need to specify an out type. So if it is a user, then it will use, so it's going to use Jackson, right, to map it, user back into a JSON object. But I'm trying to think of, for most situations, it's a good idea to go ahead and specify the type, but it wouldn't matter. We could take it off here. Anyway, the rest is, if you have experience with RESTful services or JAX-RS, it's all pretty self-explanatory. And much more convenient than, writing a service and having to configure its exposition into a servlet container. What else? I don't know. Getting tired. So, okay. Any other questions? Okay. For anybody who didn't know anything about Camel, just show of hands. Do you know a little more about Camel there? Okay. Is anybody looking at the information we saw tonight and thinking that Camel might be worth looking into more when they go back? That's versus Beal. And you're still, great. Any other questions? Yes.
So is that flow right there that you have on there? It does the get and then it's automatically going to continue on to the put, or that's just defining different endpoints?
Yeah, the route builder DSL is a really cool sort of piece of magic, right? It's not that magical, but it looks like it's connected through. But it knows, based on the type that is generated from the reply here, okay, that if it encounters something of this type, which is very similar to that type, then that's the end of that part of the route. This DSL is not really like the other Camel DSLs where you see the flow as it goes through. This is more like a fluid language for defining rest that you can put right in the middle of the Camel route. I think I bring this up because it is new and it's going to be there's going to be there's a lot of interest in this. This is one of those big features that people were requesting for a while.
This is defining a RESTful provider rather than RESTful consumer flow.
Yes. Yeah. So think about from that reverse perspective, right? This is creating a RESTful producer.
So rather than having to write spring controls.
Yes. Yeah. This would replace using Spring MVC to do REST, and you can do this right inside a Spring application because it will just tie right into the servlet container and automatically expose it. But yeah, it's in that whole producer consumer pattern, kind of understanding when you look at something, you go, well, REST is always a consumer. No, in this case, it's a producer. After it's a producer, if you call a REST service, then now it's a consumer.
I have one more question. Just to extrapolate a little bit on this example, when I was trying to use the DSL, I ran into issues with what you were talking about, how the return for every endpoint. So we say 2, 2, 2, each one comes back and it goes to the next one.
Right.
What happens if you want to take all three of those answers? Not only do they inform the next route, but you also want to retain that information and pass it back to the caller. What's the best way to capture those pieces of information, not just pass them to the next route, but also take them and put them somewhere else?
Yeah, so there's a couple of patterns that we'll use. Now, the exchange pattern, the exchange that passes through, so the more details, Camel uses the idea of exchange. The exchange actually tracks what was the body of the message from component to component. So this is a nice one of the mechanisms, so it allows you to unwind things if necessary, but that's not the best way to save and restore data for your question. But it's good for debugging. So if you have an exception in your route and it throws it, Camel's going to log that, to log the state of your data for each one of the components to show you so you can see where there's problems. And you have retry policies and keep trying. But there's, your exchanges could have metadata. There's properties, there's headers. Use of headers is very extensive. Even setting, there are header keys that you can set before calling a particular component is going to affect its behavior. SMTP component is one of them, for instance. That's how you pass dynamic properties into a call. If you look here, if we look at this, we're passing something from the header, right? So the ID, we know that this RESTful setup here, and if you're familiar with JAX RS and what this pattern is, it's saying we're defining an inbound parameter named ID. What this does, it takes whatever it decides is ID, sticks it in the header, so we can access it with header.id. Same with any other data that you have. So if you had something, if you went out and looked up some data, you have the header ID still in the header. Now you look up some data and you want to save that for later, you push that into the header. Then you go ahead and call your to-be user service to look up the user ID. And then maybe you'll do something else. And now you've got the user object body, and you've got that other piece of data that you had that's in the header, and now you're going to call another service feed to do something. And eventually, at the end of this route, because it's a get, it's got to reply back to the caller, and whatever is sitting in the main body of your message, that's the reply value. Yeah, and you know, anything that's even slightly less than trivial in this space, you're going to have a need for having to somehow store data. And I think about it like a stack. You can push data into the header, pop it back out of the header. We do that quite a bit. Yeah, that help? Just
Remember you talked about that Camel has that documentation language or with the icons and
oh yeah,
showing the very
enterprise integration
Yeah,
package.
does this does this example have that Canva, that documentation with it?
No, it's probably not the best example for it, other than going back to sort of, classic component type architecture. So you have these components that you can access as your endpoints that are sitting between your routing. I don't think that there is EIP is very specific about REST. This is like using the DSL to create one endpoint and show the design. If you want to see, okay, so here's one that uses a couple of different EIP patterns. So we're using the Apache CXF. There's some configuration up here that is setting up Spring and exposing some beans as a web service using CXF. And this, so this is tying up together, splicing it together. So we see some different EIP patterns here. We're calling out to components to do something. Multicasting. So this is taking that message body that we have, and sending it to these three recipients simultaneously. And then I think in this case, depends on what the requirement. No, with this multicast, all those are going to be processed simultaneously, and when those processes are all done is when it's going to continue. So as long as there's one still running, this route is not going to move forward until all three of those processes are finished. Then it's going to continue to do some more. So of course, there's all kind of rules like, would you really want to have something stuck, not moving forward just because one processor crapped out or is not working or whatever. So you can have rules around timeout and how you can figure that out. Or you can use more asynchronous strategies or aggregation policies to be able to do it at some point in the future. Those are all the different patterns that are available to you. Okay, that's right.
Did you say there was some sort of graphical interface with the design?
And is there a graphical interface for, yes, and that's where the JBoss Developer Studio. And it is fully drag and drop. The new version has for any of these components, there could be hundreds of properties, hundreds of settings. And unless you go to the Camel documentation, say, I have this component, and you get the page and you look through that and figure out what are all the properties, settings you can do. That contributes to a higher learning curve issue. So if you like to stay up late reading documentation like I do, that's one thing. Otherwise, the JBoss Developer Studio is a lot easier because brings all those properties and settings up front. Plus, it puts them in the contextual type of dialogues that may be more helpful, contextualizing those values. Difference between a value that's supposed to be in milliseconds and one that's true false value or things like that.
So if we go back to the user service, the security on, will you need to have the user service or they're optional?
So that's a good question. Security, right? So there's several different ways that you can implement security using the new Camel REST. It has interceptors, so I can there's a chain, a pattern of stages that a inbound request goes through. So I could go through there and select or inject an interceptor. I haven't tried to see if this is. I don't think I have everything. I just installed NetBeans. I haven't got everything building properly in here, so I don't have all the I don't use these. It's not my development machine. My development machine is too big. But no, you could you combine in interceptors, right? And then you can either use common security platforms like Spring. You can still bind in the Spring security framework, or you can implement your own. Does that answer the question?
Yes.
And it would still work if because where are we here? Okay, so this call is still it's going into the Spring context and it's calling this user service method. So it is calling a Spring proxy object. And so you have all the Spring AOP around that, and if you wanted when Spring creates an instance of an object and it injects it into the dependencies, it doesn't provide the direct instance of that object or the class. No, it provides a proxy to there, and then that's all Spring can do. It's automatic AOP magic. If I've got annotations, like if I have a security annotation around my get user method here that Spring recognizes, when Camel back here calls the get user method right there, it's actually going through that Spring proxy, and then inside the Spring proxy it says, oh, there's a security annotation on the get user method. I'm going to see if the security, check the predicate for that security. And not quite. Yeah. You say session is such a generically used term, I'm not sure. Okay, so yeah, so all the same proxy-based mechanism, proxy-based IOC container stuff still is true. So that's another way to achieve security. Okay, is that it? Fantastic. Thank you very much.